Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bitten Bandits, where, as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and bring you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. I'm Joe Marcello, and I have the absolute pleasure of bringing you another Sherlock Holmes related interview for this week. Can you imagine? Pretty crazy. All right, I'm bringing you an interview with a guy by the name of Joel Meadows. Joel is a journalist from the UK who is a fan of comics. He writes about comics. Now he's writing a comic. That's right. He's writing a story about Sherlock Holmes, specifically called Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders. And this is volume 2 in the series. He had a Kickstarter, which is now at this point fully funded for this project. But I highly encourage all of you to go to Kickstarter, look it up, check it out. And you could still, fund it even further, even though they've met their goals. It's a really interesting interview to talk to a guy who is a fan of comics, who had a chance to create one, or at this point, a volume 2 in a series, and to hear about his new take on a beloved character for decades is really interesting. So, without further ado, this is my interview with Joel Meadows. How are you, sir?
Hello, very well, thanks. Hope you're doing well.
Doing very well, thank you. I'm going to kick it off the same way we do with everyone. Is I'm going to ask how you first discovered comic books.
Well, it was my brother's fault because I was about 8 years old, and he had a friend who had a car accident, and he was stuck in hospital. So he was reading sort of Superman comics when he was stuck, and my brother basically passed some comics on to me, and sort of been I've been hooked ever since. So I was a reader of things like Superman, Action Comics, DC Comics Presents, but I was also into things like Howard the Duck when I was quite little as well, which was quite an eye opener. So yes, I've been reading comics from a very little age, really.
Do you still have any of those that you originally started collecting?
Sadly, they're gone. A lot of it, yeah. My original books are gone. For whatever, for over the years, it's some have been sold and some have just sort of just yeah. It's I don't have them anymore, sadly.
An all too common tale. Everyone gets them, they part ways with them, and if they're lucky enough, they come back around and collect them
Yes,
again.
yes, exactly.
So we're here to discuss, obviously your career, but specifically, some of your current work that you have going on.
Yes.
Um, Care to give an overview of what that is?
Well, I mean, it's I've had a slightly unusual career, I guess you could say, because we started the magazine Tripwire as a fanzine when I was 19 back in 1992. So it's been running for 32 years now. And we've kept it going and it's evolved. And there was a few years when we didn't publish it because we couldn't quite get enough advertising. We brought it back in sort of 2020. So there's that. And we're just finishing the 63rd issue of our print magazine currently as
Wow.
we speak. So there's that, and there's also the Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders graphic novel. The first book came out in January, and we're currently funding a campaign for the second book, which is currently on Kickstarter at the moment. So, and I've worked as a journalist as well. I've had stuff published in things like Time Magazine and the Times and Sunday Times and Empire and Variety and a lot of other places.
You certainly have quite a journalistic background. I think that makes for an absolutely awesome writer when it comes to comics. I'll tell you when Oren first approached me about interviewing you, I jumped at the fact because I've been this kind of behind the scenes fan of Sherlock Holmes since I was a kid. I was introduced to Sherlock Holmes, and my mother used to watch Masterpiece Theater and watch all,
Fantastic.
all the Sherlock, those like episodes that entailed Sherlock Holmes. And then
Yes.
later on over the years, reading Hound of the Baskervilles, and then obviously like, various incarnations in cinema over the years. And I always found Sherlock to be a very interesting character. And when I heard that you were working on a graphic novel of him, I wanted to jump at it. What made you want to write this?
Well, it does go back quite a few years. Sort of 20 or so odd years ago, we started to develop this. And I met my artist, Andy Bennett, through a friend of a friend. And we tried to pitch it to a couple of places and nobody bit. So we put it down for years. And then we have a thing called Lost Tales, which we run on our website, which one of our writers, Scott Braden, does occasionally. Actually, does it quite regularly, from time to time. And he asked me if I had any comic projects, which I'd worked on, which never saw the light of day. And it got me thinking about Holmes again. And after he'd interviewed me, I thought, actually, you know what? I'd like to go back to this. So we ran three shorts from Holmes, which ran in three issues of the magazine. They went really well. They're very well received. And then we ran that in like the three shorts together in an anniversary book in 2022. And then we decided to take the plunge and do a full length graphic novel story, which we've actually split into two parts. But I've been a Holmes fan for many years. Going back, watching like the Jeremy Brett TV series, watching Young Sherlock Holmes, which is a film that I still put on over Christmas. There's a good chance I may end up watching it again. And things like Sherlock Holmes is The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is the Billy Wilder film set in Scotland. I'm a huge fan of the character. I think the character is interesting because the character, kind of like James Bond, like King Arthur,
Right.
like Batman, they're sort of timeless. They're iconic, but there's a lot of flexibility in what you can do with them. And I also remember reading an old issue of Detective Comics many, many moons ago. We had Sherlock Holmes as a cameo. I think it was this 50th anniversary of the book. It was like a Mike Barr and Alan Davis issue, and he had a very small cameo at the end. But so I've always enjoyed Holmes, and it just seemed to make sense. And it's a character that I've always loved.
So without giving anything, too much away, are you writing the character slightly different or putting a spin on the character that maybe hadn't been touched on previously?
Well, I hope so. I mean, he's an older Holmes, so basically he's with Watson. The story is that Watson decides to go and leave, and he unravels the DNA helix with Crick, because Watson and Crick were the two scientists who unraveled the DNA helix. And then Oswald Mosley, who was a real life historical figure, who was basically a British Nazi, basically, he becomes prime minister, and then he creates his army of super soldiers, and then Watson is gone, so Holmes has to sort of battle again. So I guess you call it like a sci-fi steampunk story. So Holmes is older. It's not a mystery as such. Obviously Doyle was all about the mystery, whereas it is more of an adventure story. So he's slightly different. He's an older figure, but he's still not to be underestimated. So I hope there are echoes of Doyle's character, because he's kind of quite irascible, and because he's older, he's even more difficult to deal with. But he's surrounded by lots of new people that we haven't seen before, and it was important for me to create a kind of a whole new sort of milieu for him to sit in, basically. So new characters, new villains, new allies, a whole new situation that hopefully people haven't seen before.
So new villains, we won't be seeing the old standby, uh, Sherlock Holmes villain in this one, will we?
Not in this one, but there are
Okay.
plans possibly to have not Moriarty, but to have a possible, uh, very well known other Sherlock Holmes villain in, because I'm planning a third book. So the
Okay.
first story is in two parts, and there's going to be a third standalone volume after that, and that will probably feature this character who I'm not going to mention yet, but the
Certainly
plans
not.
are to include. So there's no Moriarty in this. There's no Mycroft either. So it's basically
Okay.
Holmes and Watson, and the other characters are all brand new for the story.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Now, when you started down this path, did you really plan it out to be in, like a series?
Possibly. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with it. I knew that the idea of putting Holmes in a brand new setting and giving him, a whole new set of characters, I thought would be interesting. So possibly I wasn't quite sure what I was thinking, because this is, as I said, this goes back quite a few years. But yeah, I mean, it's got, the thing is, the world that I've sort of created. Uh, so I've put him in this world. There's so much scope. We could do another 15 to 20 stories potentially with the characters. And I'm thinking about doing a spin-off with one of the other characters, possibly. I'm considering that at the moment. So when I started, I wasn't quite sure what I was thinking. I just thought I wanted to have a go at it to see where it led, basically.
Now, writing, obviously, reading comics in the States, I'm not too familiar with reading comics from, other countries, but as a writer, do you feel that there are many differences? Like you have possibly some more room to play with in terms of storylines, tone, character development, things of that nature?
Probably. I mean, I look at things like cinema. I mean, film is a big influence on the work that I do in terms of how I write. So I look at films. So, for example, in the first book, the first three or four pages, it's almost kind of like a sort of Day of the Jackal sort of action scene. So you get thrown into the action, but this is not Holmes. This is another character, another quite major character. So I like to look at cinema. I mean, obviously, I've read comics for years, so obviously they have influenced me. But I like to look outside of comics. because I think it's important to bring in other influences
Right.
if you're writing whatever you're writing.
Who have been some of your comic book inspirations on your way to writing this?
Well, I mean, I guess there's two writers. One hasn't really done that much comics. The one has done a lot of comics. The first one is fantasy writer Michael Moorcock, who I've interviewed a number of times. Who created Elric, and he dealt in like an alternate world. And while Holmes is nowhere near as grandiose or as epic or as bizarre as his Eternal Champion stuff, it does owe a bit to that. And the other person I have to mention is Brian Talbot, because things like Luther Arkwright. And again, Holmes is a bit more grounded. It's not quite as bizarre and as out there, and I'm a huge fan. And I was lucky enough. I got a quote from Brian Tor, which I feel very very grateful for. So I guess those two were big influences on this series. But I do read. I've always enjoyed things like Grant Morrison's work, and things like Jeff Loeb, things like Long Halloween. I'm really enjoying his last Halloween series that's running at DC at the moment. So I guess there are writers like that, but Moorcock and Talbot are two that I can directly say would definitely have a big influence, and it would be remiss of me not to tip my writer's hat to them and say that you know they didn't quite show the way, but they showed the path in a
Right.
way of how I could approach this.
So, in terms of, obviously this being a graphic novel, art plays a big role in it.
Yes.
How did you come about working with your artists? And was there a look you were going for?
Well, I mean, Andy Bennett, I was introduced to him by somebody, and I can't remember because it's sort of lost in the mist of time, sort of 20 plus years ago. But he's an American artist who's based in Columbus, in Ohio, but he's got quite British sensibilities, so he works perfectly. I wanted to have an older Holmes. Some people say that it's a little bit like Peter Cushing, a little bit.
Yeah.
So he's older, he's physically less, he's more infirm than he used to be. But there's still something about this man. And then things like the pin-ups and the covers, because obviously the first book we had original covers from Walt Simonson and Mark Chiarello, and the second volume we got original covers from Dan Panosian and Fraser Irving, and I didn't want to give them too much guidance because I wanted them to be almost kind of like abstract covers, because the best covers are they're either literal interpretation of what's in there, or they are more abstract versions of what's inside the story. But I always thought, I mean, a little bit like Cushing, I guess, a little bit of a Peter Cushing figure for the older Holmes. I mean, that's he's played him, so it's not a bad choice, to base Holmes on his look. So, but I
That's
didn't
where
want to
my
give people too much art direction, to be
that's where
honest, with some of these things.
that's where my mind goes to. When someone says Sherlock Holmes, it's Peter Cushing
And
initially,
no,
and
I mean he
then
was a great choice. So I can't, I can't argue. So yes, so yeah, but I mean with the some of the pin-ups, I gave them a little bit of latitude and said, look, just do what you want. I mean, we've had some amazing. We got George Pratt who gave us a pin-up for the second book, and it's a beautiful piece. And Tom Coker, and they're all very different.
Mhm.
And I wanted to give people, as well as the covers and the actual comics, I wanted to give people a different flavor for each of these pin-ups, which I thought would be fun to give people the chance to interpret the world that we've created.
So let's take a step back, if you wouldn't mind, and
Yeah, of
if
course.
we could discuss kind of your journey to, you've done quite a bit of different work over the years.
Yes.
How did you get to writing comics?
Well, I mean, it was just I thought it was time, I guess. I mean, I had to go back in 2000. I wrote a short Holmes piece, which ran in the original proposal, and it's not great now. But I guess you always have to get through the stuff that you don't really like to get to the other stuff. So I don't know. I'd read them for so long, and I've read a lot of other stuff. Like I've read the two William Goldman books, Adventures in the Screen Trade and What Lie Did I Tell. So I read the Robert Rodriguez Road Without a Crew book about making film, and it's not a hugely well, it is different. They're different beasts, but you can apply certain things. There are certain things that you can apply because good writing is good writing, hopefully. So it's just something that I fancied having a go at, all those years ago, and I put it down as I said for 15 years, and I didn't think about it at all. But I felt like now I've I've covered comics for many years in the magazine and on the website, and I just thought it was time to go back to it. And I've been incredibly. I feel very privileged and very lucky that I had some amazing feedback from people like everybody from Ian Rankin, who writes Rebus, to Guillermo del Toro, Jeff Loeb, Frank Quitely, Brian Talbot, Michael Moorcock, Kelly Jones, some amazing people who've been incredibly generous with their time, to give me feedback. And I feel very lucky that I've had the chance to do this.
You've certainly gone to the right people, that's for sure. I mean, quite a list of folks that you can kind of go to and get, feedback from.
Oh, it is amazing. I mean, having worked as a journalist and running the magazine for all these years, I'm lucky because I have access to people and that they'll kindly give me the time, give me some sort of feedback, which is much appreciated because the people whose work, I've admired for decades, and it's nice that they can give me honest feedback and they all seem to like it, which I also find amazing.
What was your creative process like? I mean, you go from being a journalist, obviously
Yes.
writing, but
Yes.
this is you're not writing about comics, you're writing comics at this point. So you're writing, the tone, the, characters, everything. What was that like for you, and how long did this whole journey take for you?
It took a little while. We started with the shorts because the shorts are because a lot of good British writers, they all started doing stuff for 2000 AD. So having 6 to 8 page shorts was a great way to train my brain to go, okay, this is, as you say, this is not a feature, this is not a journalistic piece, this is a piece of comic writing. So it gets you into the world and gets you into the mindset of writing. And then once we'd done that, once we decided to do the whole thing, I plotted the whole story. It was originally going to be one volume, but I realized it was far too much story to put into one volume, so we wanted to give it room to breathe. And then once I'd done that, I write DC style. Although, to be honest, if Andy Bennett says I want to change this panel, I want to do something a little bit different, then more power to him because he does some amazing work. So they're there as guidelines, but my scripts are not Alan Moore style. I don't write 4 pages for one panel.
Right.
I mean, in the first book, there was the page I mentioned with the assassin. It was basically so it's him on the left, and then you've got 4 portholes, and I drew it as like a child's scrawl, and I sent it to Andy. I said, "Can you replicate that?" And he replicated it far better, than I could possibly have imagined. So yeah, so I write DC style, and then I send Andy the scripts, and then he gives it back to me.
That sounds it's quite a different, different, change of pace
Yeah, oh yeah, it is.
from
It
the
is.
journalistic world. So as you're obviously a fan,
Yes.
and you've made comics your life, have there been perhaps characters that you've read and been a fan of over the years that you've possibly wanted to, maybe take a writing swing at?
Well, possibly. I mean, a few years ago, I had to go. I developed a couple of Hellblazer proposals, which never went anywhere. So I've always thought it might be fun to have a crack at him, and I had to go. Again, they were unsuccessful, but I did write up a couple of proposals for a couple of sort of Batman stories. So yeah, I mean, I am open to stuff. I'm considering, whether I can kind of lend my talents to existing characters. I've thought about. It. I haven't sort of taken the plunge much with this, but I have thought about it. So that's something that I might pursue again over the next year.
Are you listening, DC?
Well, I hope so. Or any well, yes, exactly.
Do you think that your writing style or talents are kind of more akin to a particular style of comic versus another? Obviously you had this more of a pulp style, period type comic versus say like a horror, sci-fi, something to that effect.
Uh, probably. I mean, the other influence I didn't mention, apart from the Moorcock and Talbot, is I'm a big fan of the Three Musketeers, the two Richard Lester films, and the two French productions, and I wanted to bring kind of a sense of that as well. So yeah. Probably. I mean, I'd like to stretch myself a bit, but there probably are some things that I'm probably not suited to, and I am the first to admit that. So yeah, probably. So crime stuff. Um, Superheroes, I'm not sure actually, so I don't know. But yeah, it probably is suited to a particular kind of subject, certainly.
Batman.
Yeah, I'll
I
be up for
mean,
that. Yeah, no, I think I probably
that
would
would
be.
that would be pretty amazing. I mean,
Yeah, no, I that was definitely. I had a story many moons ago which never kind of went anywhere, which it probably isn't. The other thing I've got to keep up with sort of current continuity as well. But I would love to have the chance. That would be amazing.
just wait for some of those public domain characters that you can add into your
Oh
story.
yes, I know. There's quite a few coming into public domain quite soon.
Yeah, I think next year there's a whole ton of characters that you can utilize. Anyway, I'm just getting
Yes.
ahead of myself. So after Sherlock, are there other stories or other work that you plan on getting to?
Possibly. I admit I haven't given it that much thought. I guess I could something I could lend myself to. I mean, I've there's a in the first book, and there will be in the second as well. There's a prose story, and I quite enjoy it. I mean, I've been working on it. This is an actual original character called the Hanging Man, which is a London detective story which I haven't touched in about 4 years. So he's an amnesiac detective, and I was actually thinking about going back to that. I mean, I've had a crack at two or three drafts, neither of which have been particularly successful yet, but I could go back. So possibly, but beyond that, I'm not sure. I mean, in theory, yes.
As a resident of the UK, and
Yes.
um, do you notice any differences between the comic book worlds there versus in the States? Like there are different types of stories that are popular there versus here.
Well, a little bit, but some stuff is international. And you mentioned things like Batman and sort of DC stuff that is still popular here.
Right.
So I think that there isn't that much of a difference. I mean, the comics industry in the UK is very small. There's only a couple of big players, but the comic shops still sell the same books that you'd find if you went into a comic shop in New Jersey or LA or San Francisco or something. So I think this stuff is international.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That was going to be my next question, is what you thought of, comic books in general, um, in the UK versus here, because nowadays it's kind of, digital comics and technology allows us to, you know, connect with artists and writers, all over the world. And you're more, versus everything was done via FedEx
Of
and
course.
the mail. Now, it's not unheard of to talk to people that they're working in New York and their artists are in the Philippines, and
Yes.
things of that nature, which is fantastic, because now we have the opportunity to just see so many different artists. What's that like in the UK? I mean, obviously, we're bringing everyone together and you're working with such great talent.
Yes.
Is that world kind of, ever expanding and booming there as well?
Well, I mean, things seem to be going quite well. I mean, it's tough. There are certain shops like Gosh, which is the big comic shop in London, which has been there since, let me get this right, since '87, I think it is. It's moved to a different location, and things like Forbidden Planet is still, going pretty well. So yeah, I mean, there is still a quite a big scene. There is still British creators, and you still get shows, quite big shows. We get lots of British and also foreign creators coming as well. So yeah, I think it's still there's still a buzz. There's a lot of really great kind of UK indie comic artists and creators as well. Some of whom have started to work. Like there's a guy called Russell Olson who's actually American, who's been doing work for Mad Cave, and a guy called Gustavo Vargas who is Peruvian who lives in Scotland. So there is a yeah. I mean, I think there is definitely quite a big community over here.
That sounds great. Now, are you going to be doing any like conventions in your neck of the woods to push
Uh,
this?
well, probably yeah. I mean, next year we're looking at possibly doing the London Film and Comic Con, which happens in. Let me think. There's one in March and one in July. So we'll probably do that's in Olympia in London, and then we did Thought Bubble in November up in Harrogate. So we'll probably do that again this year. And so we always do a few shows. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm still trying to work out what the plans are for next year. But since the second Holmes book should be out for May, we'd like to get it kind of on the road, if you like, and get it out there for people to see. So we will definitely be doing some shows next year.
So before we go, I just want to make sure I get everyone to follow your content. Where can fans follow you online, and where can they, read your upcoming work and current work and things of that nature?
Well, I mean, I guess the Tripwire magazine.co.uk is sort of like the base where most of the stuff is, but there's also Twitter. I still use X Twitter, so it's Joel Meadows one. And then I am also on Blue Sky. People might have to search. I think it's just so it's joelmeadows.bsky.social. So I'm on Blue Sky, and then Facebook there is a Tripwire page if people search, and also there's a Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders page as well. And also there's the Kickstarter campaign currently, which is if people search for Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders, I can send you the URL if you want to add it to if you have like a library.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm in quite a few places on social media. So,
All right.
but yeah, so I mean, the campaign is running at the moment. It ends the middle of February, so we've extended it with these late pledges, so people can still pledge on it until basically the middle of February. But we'll be making regular editions available through the direct market in time for May as well by
Okay.
places like Luna and Diamond. So there are options, but we have these signed plate editions which are only going to be available through the Kickstarter, basically. So
So let's definitely, we'll share your Kickstarter link in our show notes and make sure
perfect,
that it,
thank
it
you.
is certainly out before that, before it ends, so everyone can
Perfect, thank you.
contribute and share that.
I'm going to
Uh,
send you my Twitter link as well.
Fabulous.
So, and I'll send you the two Facebook groups. So yeah, we,
Okay.
we are quite active out there. So it's good to, you know,
What is your we've had a lot of artists on lately that artists, contributors,
yes,
creators that have Kickstarters, and it
yes,
just seems like the best possible avenue for someone who's getting, you know, started in comics, or a new comic off the ground. That seems
yes.
to be the best avenue for doing so.
Well,
What
yes, I
is
think
your
I
experience?
would, yeah, I would agree. Actually, yes, I think it is. I mean, you have to be prepared for certain things. You have to make sure that your material is ready, and that and it's up to up to your own standards. I mean, I'm
Right.
not, there's apples and oranges, so it don't have to be of a particulars. As long as you're happy, with the work that you're putting out, and you have an audience. I mean, we're lucky because we've done the magazine for a long time and the website, so people know who we are, and obviously we have gone with some big names, so that's also helped. But just what I would do is if anyone's planning to do a Kickstarter or a Zoop or any kind of crowdfunding campaign, they should go to base sit down and work out a hit list of what they need to do before the campaign is live. And we'll think about how to promote it, because there are loads of Facebook groups and places that are appropriate for your particular project, which is what we do to kind of spread the word and keep spreading the word over the course of the campaign. But make sure you're very organized. I think that's probably my biggest bit of advice if anybody is planning one of these, and more power to everybody. I mean, there's no reason why anyone couldn't do it if there's an audience, and if it's like, if there's a project they want to get out there, but just be prepared. I think that's key.
And we're back. So, what do you guys think of that? I really enjoyed talking to Joel. I loved hearing about his new take on a beloved character of Sherlock Holmes. I've been a fan of Sherlock since I was a kid, from the Masterpiece Theater days. Um, so, I'm looking forward to reading this volume. I highly encourage everyone to go check out Kickstarter and look up for Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders, Volume 2. And if you haven't already done so, contribute to the Kickstarter. Just because they met their goal doesn't mean you can't contribute some more. Anything above and beyond their goal is just gravy. It comes back to us as the reader. So until next time, hope you all have a great weekend. Rate, review, and subscribe. And we'll see you next week.